PPR 1.75 tight end premium start 10. Rich, you going Chris Olave and Breece Hall or Jalen Waddle and a 25 first? Let's call it early to mid. Go ahead, man.
I like that this trade includes Superflex and 0.175 tight end premium, which doesn't involve a quarterback or a tight end. Although I guess the projected first, actually 2025 first probably isn't good, right? I'm not as dialed in on next year's Devy class as probably you guys are, but I don't think the quarterback class is particularly strong, right? So it probably doesn't matter that much. I think I'm Olave and Breece Hall here. I slightly edge Olave. I think Waddle heads up, and then I'm just gonna take like the Breece Hall window right now. But I could be totally swayed based on like if you guys can dial me into next year's running back class. Right here is good, but I mean we've heard that before, and like things don't play out that way.
What do you think, Scott?
Yeah, I'm going to take the Olave Breece Hall because you're essentially people are going to say, oh, I prefer Olave over Waddle or I prefer Waddle over Olave, but I basically can wash them in the trade. And I think most people would give up a first because how many times have you thought that's going to be the 101, 102, and it's the 104, 105, and you miss the tier by one pick and you're going, man, I traded a top 12 skill player asset for next year's 105, and I'm hoping that there's a running back. It's probably honestly not going to be the RB1. You're probably looking more like the RB2, RB3, depending on the receivers and quarterbacks, where, Breece is what he is. I think this probably fits a specific roster. Like I don't know if you can get more than an early first for Breece Hall, meaning it sounds like Breece should be a big asset, but anybody that has Breece or Bijan or Gibbs, go try to get an asset that's above that. And there's probably going to be only a little bit of a taste for that type of asset in your league, meaning not everybody wants running backs. There are plenty of people that are just like, I'll get by with James Conner and Gus Edwards, and I'll save my first for next year, and hopefully I get another doesn't have to be Breece, but another rookie running back with a role that has a good profile. I'll just worry about it next year because there is the idea of I'm holding my pick and maybe something better comes along. Not a running back, quarterback, something like that. So I think I'll still take the Breece and Olave side, though.
So Johnny Detroit in the audience actually had an Olave or Achane thing question here. He says Olave or Achane plus a 25 first. And he says a non-PPC format, so non-point per carry. Let's just assume let's call that a late 25 first. We're calling it a playoff 25 first, an Achane or Olave. What do you think, Rich?
Man, it's I mean maybe team context matters here, but I mean I would probably take Achane and probably any first for Olave, I think, in a blanket. But I mean I could it is close. I think team context matters. What kind of wide receivers do you have? Are you competing right now? I am pretty high on Olave, but also Olave is kind of in a nebulous situation, right? Like, does that quarterback situation ever get solved? Do we see some kind of reduction in his role? I mean, Olave is a guy that has played a decent amount in the slot his first 2 years in the NFL. Going to Clint Kubiak, does he play more two wide receiver stuff? Like, that's just like where he's pigeonholed to be outside. If you look at like kind of where the landscape has kind of shifted in the defensive meta, you want guys that have like diverse usage, wide receivers with diverse usage. Guys are playing now, like the NFL is getting the ball to their wide receiver ones now more than they did 5 or 6 years ago. They've kind of solved this like Rubik's Cube a little bit by moving guys around, and you're starting to see like the wide receiver ones bounce back. There was a little gap there when teams started shifting to a lot of 11 personnel where the wide receiver ones weren't as productive to the field. They were conceding more ground. But now that teams are starting to say like, well, shit, I'm just going to move CeeDee Lamb around, or like I'm going to move, Tyreek Hill around. Like that started to shift. In like the past 2 years, wide receiver ones are taking up a larger portion of the fantasy pie. And I wonder if that hurts like Olave in like the short term a little bit, maybe with the Clint Kubiak stuff, even though I'm excited that they're going to do some modern things that Dennis Allen's going to do. Sure. But I think Olave is also one of these guys like we could also be from a dynasty stance, like always holding a candle for of like we always perceive him to be better than what he's actually turning in. I think he also could be one of those kind of guys too. So if I can get like multiple firsts for Olave, I'm probably doing that right now.
For sure. Do you see Derek Carr, Scott, as like whatever, solid enough for Olave? Like, do you worry about that when you're thinking about Olave? Do you consider Carr to be like whatever, he can get it done?
I think he's average. I think the narrative, though, that he's not good for receivers is false. I also think you're stuck with him for multiple years. You look at his contract. He's going to start for multiple years. They're not going to turn it over to Spencer Rattler. They're not going to gut the roster, and all of a sudden everything is just turned over. I've seen some panic on the Saints that it's going to go badly. You know, Kamara is going to get pulled back, and I'm not willing to bet on it. With that said, I think you could argue the right roster with the right construction, Achane over Olave straight up. Now, you don't have to because the market's going to prefer receivers. But I'm looking at that late first. I mean, I've talked about this. The first time I really put it out there was the last time Rich was on. And I've been practicing what I'm preaching. If you are not a receiver that I'm going to project to have I'll be generous and say 25% target share minimum. Like that's the minimum. If you're below that and you're living off of, you know, I'm relying on my quarterback efficiency to get me into the top 15, top 12. Like I'm not going to bet on that. And then, you know, I was going through Malik Neighbors a little bit, just picking a random player. I think it's fair. You can slap Malik Neighbors with a 25% target share pretty easily. But then you look at like, what is that actually going to become? Like his team's shitty. Their pass rate is low. The quarterbacks historically doesn't throw touch. Like there's no way for Malik Neighbors to deliver whatever he is on Underdog, like wide receiver 17, 18, something like that, unless he's just a generational prospect. And there's a world where he is. The last 3 rookie generational prospects literally came from the same school he's coming from, and they were all top 10 picks. So, I mean, there's a world, but I think if you told me I have a first and it's a moderately active league, I bet you I can strike and get a comparable to receiver to Olave that fits that spot that I already have Olave parked in, and I'm getting Achane on top, and Achane is the perfect. You have to just set and forget him. If my best running back is, I don't know, let's say I have Rashad White as my RB1, and then I'm kind of just like streaming running backs from there on out, like that's the kind of team where I go trade for Achane, play him every week. Never debate, is he going to get enough time? You literally are just going to ride out the wave of war that he gives you throughout the season. So I'm taking the Achane in the first side easily, especially if I can go buy Mike Evans, Devontae Adams. That's a layup. That is, I can buy those guys whenever I want, however I want with that first. It's just a matter of, do I want to do it today or mid-season?
Yeah, you just know they have no liquidity moving forward, but you're just
it's a sunk cost.
You know what you're buying, and it's gonna get you fantasy points. Ideally, is what you want, right? What Scott was saying about Neighbors being on a crappy team. Rich, I was listening to one of you were guesting on a pod the other day, and you were like, let's just keep it simple. You want young players on good teams that score points in terms of who you're targeting in fantasy football. It makes sense, right? It's like, I want a high-powered offense that will score touchdowns, those things. But you get into a bunch of advanced stuff. Help meet us. Let's meet in the middle. Let's meet in the middle, because you're going to talk a bunch of fancy stuff tonight, and then we talk about just liking good players on good teams. What do our folks in the audience need to be looking at? If you give a couple stats.
I mean, listen, I'm in a world where content creation in this saturated market, and you try to be unique and have access to all this data. But I mean, there's a simple way to play fantasy football, right? Like it is like you want players, especially from a redraft stance, like when we're talking about drafting players, because right now from February till like August, like all you've heard is like player takes, right? Like individual player takes. We still have like a very finite amount of people are actually like doing stuff that like shows you how to play the game. It's just literally player takes, and it's like the echo chamber of Twitter and what it's become. But you just want to focus on like good players, like good teams, right? Like it's very simple. Like it's very easy. Like guys on the right end of the age apex. Like we can start to peel the onion back a little bit and layer out. But definitely ask yourself, when you're breaking players of the team, especially when you're looking at like these underground metrics, like you're looking at yards per out run, you're looking at all these different things like target share and like all these slot rate, man coverage rate, and then you're just like, yeah, but this Malik Neighbors, just use him for an example, like where he is in like ADP, and you're like, yeah, but he plays for the Giants, is be catching passes from Daniel Jones. They might be bottom 8 in the NFL in like terms of offense, or like I'm looking at, say like, who's he go around, like say Nico Collins, right? Like, and you're like, Nico Collins plays for the Houston Texans, and not only are they like projected to be like a top 12 team in scoring, but like, they play indoors. He's got a quarterback. Like it's like you could just use simple things, right? And not get caught up like in the weeds of like all these different advanced metrics we have. You can start to like peel back the onion a little bit, but there's also an element of like where we've been doing this, you get inundated with all these like stats and statistics. They just like go back to the basics, man. Keep it simple, and kind of work backwards from there. But I always like, especially because the best ball streets, I always had with Scott, like probably 3 or 4 weeks ago when we were drafting a team. It's just like I try to just like try to stick with that, and when I'm doing the best ball thing too, and you try to get player exposure, but it's just like, I still want to be drafting players of good teams, teams I project to be good at least too, because not every team that was bad last year also is going to be bad this year. But I mean, just draft players that are in good teams. It's always easy. It's always easy to start there. I don't want Antonio Gibson, I don't want him. I don't want any Patriots. I don't want any Patriots players.
I know, still, right? That's it used to be like that with the Jets always. So Rich, we get hammers from our supporters. So buymeacoffee.com/tradesin5. You can buy us coffees, also known as hammers, of course. So John Eggs got us 2 of them. Appreciate it. Scott, we'll start with you here. This is a 12-team Superflex, half PPR, start 9. The team is Herbert, May, Penix, Dimes. There you go. Chase, London, Nico, Rome, Brian Thomas, Jaden Reed, Dio John, and a couple others at wide receiver. Then at running back has Trey Benson, Chuba Hubbard, and Trash Cans. And then Freiermuth at tight end. He's got 225 firsts and seconds, 426 firsts and 2 seconds. Been rebuilding for 2 years. Am I ready to buy hammer, RBs, and compete? Looks like, am I ready to buy hammers or RBs to compete? Or do I still need to chill for another year? Soft compete? Should he do a soft compete? I've never seen that, but thank you, John Eggs. What do you think here, Scott? 12/9.
Yeah, it's an interesting term. We always use I'm a live underdog is a team in Dynasty where you don't expect anything, but you're also not trying to actively lose. So you're just like, I'll just take my chances. Those are usually the teams I want to have some picks in reserve, which this person definitely does. 6 firsts over the next 2 years stashed. They're already loading up on the 26 class, which little known about it, but I do think one of my bets that I'm willing to make is I'm willing to trade for 26 a little more aggressively, because I do think there's going to be a lack of quarterbacks and receivers available in 25, which will make people will get excited about running backs. But I think what's going to happen with next year's class is that the running back class is going to be very exciting to the teams that already hold the picks. Like, how exciting is it right now if you don't have Jonathan Taylor or Jonathan Brooks to trade for him? It was exciting if you punted running back for the last 3 years and Jonathan Brooks lands in your draft and you have the pick to get him. But in terms of like what their market is worth, that's where I'm a little hesitant on next year's picks. Like, I want to get him, but once I get him, I don't know if it's just going to be, oh man, this is the next big thing at running back. I was 5 of them I'm going to be able to sell for anything that I want. So I like where he stands with the picks. Here's my assessment.
Let's look at that QB room.
Yeah, Scott. The quarterbacks aren't good. The quarterbacks aren't good enough. I don't mind building a quarterback room that's gross like this when you're not trying to really contend. Here's the other issue. We have too many receivers here. So we're literally sitting guys like Deontay Johnson or Jaden Reed. Like, we're not able to even start them all. But we also have between Deontay, Nico, Reed, London. There's a varying degree of, I think, risk with all of those guys at their current price point. So I think this would be one where, and I'm going to ask Rich this. I mean, Jalen Polk and Malachi Corley are wasted picks. They are only good picks if you can flip them and get some flexibility. But other than that, I feel like they're just kind of chilling out on the roster, never really with a chance to make a big difference. But I don't know what the plan is when you drafted those guys, unless it's anytime I can get a second for Corley or 2 seconds for Polk, I'll just move them. But here'd be my thing with Rich. Rich, is this a team that you'd be willing to overpay to get the one piece, probably at running back or quarterback, that could put you truly in the mix of like, I could get a 6 seed, I could get a 5 seed. I still have the draft capital in the future. I'm not worried about that. I can trade 2 of those picks away and be fine. But it almost feels like this team needs I don't know. Can I throw a Jaden Reed on top of a first and go get a Jonathan Taylor type, something like that? And I don't want to, but I just don't see this team winning. But it also has some assets and I fear that, and we don't know John's league, but you know what else I fear in this league? There's probably not a lot available future first to get either, because he's already got 6 of them, right? So like the teams that have already been willing just to sell out, he's already preyed on them. So it's a tough spot. It's a good build, a lot of assets. I have no problem kind of slow rolling this team, but I don't think it contends. And I also think you're going to run into a class next year where I don't know what you're going to be able to get to those first, even if they're high first. Like you're going to have to find the right manager that really wants Ollie Gordon or Ashton Genty or someone like that. And I just don't know if the market's going to be there. Just my opinion.
You buying a hammer running back here, Rich? It's a 12-team start 9 half PPR. Is the team ready for it?
I think that Scott laid that out pretty well. I'm definitely, chilling on all these picks here. There's a squint to see it to say you might luck box into something, right? Like Herbert's more efficient than we think, in the new system, with Harbaugh, and then like maybe Dimes is like a fringe QB1, right? And like you're competing on that level, and then Chase is doing his thing. London makes that step forward. You've got Nico, and those guys are kind of carrying you like on a weekly basis. And then maybe James Conner misses his 4 weeks that he's going to miss, and you're kind of getting in the right spot, and you're kind of just like you lurch into the playoffs that way. But I don't want to pay from this roster to make the playoffs, because you probably don't win it all, right? Like you just don't have the kind of assets, even you get into the dance, to say like I'm going to pull 3 weeks off of like this team scoring 200 points, right?
Rich, would you give up seconds on this team to just like? Would you give up a second if you could get let's say you could get Raheem Mostert, and Ty Chandler? You get 2 of them for 1 second.
I'm honestly probably trying to look at this team right now and saying what he has, and looking at guys like Jaden Reed, Deontay Johnson, Polk, Corley, probably even Freiermuth while he still is holding on to like kind of where he is right now, and probably trying to tier up with those guys in those spots and play for 2025, 2026. Sure. We talked about Jaden Reed pretty extensively last time I was on about he was kind of like that grouping of guys we talked about, like you should be trying to tier up. Deontay's right there, right? Like Deontay probably is in a very nebulous dynasty spot anyways, right? Like you consider his age, where he's at. Like what if the Panthers are trash and like he does nothing? He goes into free agency next year. They don't retain him. Like, where does he even look? What does he even look like going into next year? Where I think right now you can at least say like, hey, I've got a guy that's projecting for 125, 150 targets for your playoff team. You need this. I don't need this. I'm not going to make the playoffs, or if I do, I'm a 6 seed or like a 5 seed. So like you need this. So like maybe I'm taking those guys right now, and like you said, the picks are probably bludgeoned, but maybe you can turn those into some other assets as well. Like maybe a Jalen Warren type, right? Like that type, or you build your running back room up like that. Some of the fringe assets, and you add those 2025 hammer running backs that if it pans out, you've got those picks. Work for it. That's the other thing you have to look at with this roster too, is you have those picks. I don't know where the picks you bought lie or project to be, but your picks yourself are probably in the middle on this roster.
Right.
So like you're probably not going to be getting Ashton Giante, like, unless
the point is, I think when you have multiple picks, you're kind of leveraging the fact that you're going to strike a couple of them being good. Someone said in the chat, I think this would be interesting. Would you give up 4 of those first for Trey McBride and Kyler Murray?
Yeah,
we're basically
not deleted the team, but yeah, you'd have Herbert and Kyler.
You're basically now just running back production away from, now you're rolling out McBride, Kyler, Herbert, Jamar Chase, Nico Collins, Drake London. You know what I mean? Like it's
I would definitely Kyler side would be the selling point for me, just right. Like you're getting an apex quarterback, and you've already got Herbert. Like you've got 2 guys that are going to start for 12 years. Guys that are going to start.
And can you do 3 firsts and sell somebody on Michael Penix instead of an extra first? Like that would be something I would try. But if it gets turned, like I'm not going lower than like the T-Law, Jordan Love, that would be the lowest I'd go at QB. You know what I mean? Like that's the cutoff. And if none of those guys are available, then you just kind of play it forward for the next year again.
Scott, I'm actually gonna turn this on you. So Rich, we were trying to think. I was like, Scott, help me out here, man. I need to make a thumbnail and all. Give me a theme for tonight, right? And Scott said, what was it? Realistic expectations, right? Scott,
I think that's what I said. Right?
That is what you said, and you're gonna have to say more about it right now. What did you have in mind?
It's not in the Dynasty Gamers toolbox, I don't think.
So what are we talking about here? And I put Marv on the cover.
Well,
go ahead.
I mean, I already kind of mentioned it a little bit with Malik Neighbors, but I think when it comes to Dynasty, I mean, we're getting right up against now where you truly have to kind of look at your expectations for this year. And stuff's going to change in training camp and preseason where you may not see rose-colored glasses with a certain situation. And then, you know, maybe it changes a month from now. But I think a lot of teams right now go about things a little bit the wrong way when it comes to they hold tightly on the assets that they believe in. They hold tightly on the depth on their roster because, you know, it's no shade on Rich, but a lot of people just think it's contender or pretender. Are you a contender? And what I try to do is I try to look at, yes, I'm a contender. So it's easy if I'm speaking to everybody out there that has a contending team. And I know a lot of our listeners have contending teams. We see them donate the hammers and put their teams in the chat. And you're like, that's a ridiculous roster. Those are the teams that need the most attention. And what I mean by that is if I already have a top 3 squad, you know what I don't need? I don't need all of that excess right now. Meaning, like, let's look realistically at a guy like Jaden Reed on my roster. I mean, we all know the names: Reed, Zay Flowers, Jackson Smith and Jigba. I mean, it's that same tier we talked about a couple months ago where they're never probably top 12 receivers. Maybe one of them gets there.
Most of these rookies.
But to be fair, this is the window, Rich, where people are most excited. Not Jordan Addison anymore, but like there might be a deal to be had where you move one of the rookies from last year. You move JSN in a second for Jordan Addison in a first. You know, like that's the type of deal you might be able to do right now because of the news. But the bet there is that they kind of just occupy the same spot on your team. You need enough of those guys that are going to have a 20+% target share, that are going to be potentially on decent passing offenses, but they're not going to burn you. And I think a lot of times we hold on to those with absolute like vice grips. And I asked Ray this the other night, Rich. I want to ask you, let's say you have a team right now. Let's just make it a deep league, okay? Like a 14 by 12, something like that, 14 by 11, okay? Do you really want Adam Thielen in Dynasty? Yes or no?
I mean, no.
We'll stop at no. The answer for 99.9% of people is no, okay? But there's a team in the league that has Adam Thielen, right? He's on somebody's roster. Now, I looked through like 5 teams today with Adam Thielen, and I couldn't necessarily tell if they were contending or not. But you know what I could tell you? Most of them looked fairly like competitive, like they have other players. None of them are set up to actually ever play Adam Thielen. So they go, oh, well, I don't need him. He's my 4th receiver on my bench, right? I have 2 running backs and 3 receivers that I would flex ahead of Adam Thielen. And then they go, well, that means what should you do? Well, you know, yeah, Shane, he'll say, well, sell everything on your bench, right? Sell Adam Thielen. Go try to sell him. So he's a poor man's example of a deep league where this would apply. But how many leagues are you starting Jacoby Myers or Josh Palmer or Pop Douglas or Dontavian Wicks? And a lot of those guys are going to fall very similar from a WAR perspective or a contribution perspective with some of the quote unquote dynasty starters that you have. And we don't think about actually the realistic expectations of what is the difference between Hollywood Brown and Adam Thielen. If I just need one spot and I'm just looking at a season-long commitment, it's not their value gap versus what their production would be. The value gap is a lot higher. And somebody in Dynasty would want Hollywood Brown. Maybe they don't pay what you would want to pay, but they would want him. Sure, I'll give you 2 seconds. I have Mahomes. Sure, I'll give you a second in this other player. Thielen, don't even want him.
No, zero.
So the point is, with a lot of these players, early on in the season, there is a hack to be able to make sure those guys actually make your lineup. There's nothing worse than going, man, I had Josh Palmer. He was a top 12 receiver 3 times in the first 5 weeks, but I never played him because he was my wide receiver 7. And you go, well, who were you playing over him? I was jamming in T. Higgins every week, and I just had to jam in whatever Bear receiver I had. All of them were just starting because the Bears are going to be so great. Meanwhile, it's a rookie QB that's probably not going to support 3 top 30 receivers. So it's just little things like that. And what do you ultimately lose if you're wrong on Jaden Reed becoming a 15-point per game receiver? Nothing. I mean, you sold him for a first. You wish you didn't have to take the risk of a first next year when I pick a player. But I think we just look at things very, very like contender or pretender, and then I need all of this depth on my bench. Gus Edwards is another one. I was looking at my Gus Edwards today. He's like my RB 5 or 6 on every team I have him. You know when I should probably want to play him? Like the first 2 weeks of the season. Exactly. Because after that, he may never be usable again. But I'm going to have him on my bench for quote-unquote depth. Meanwhile, I'm starting Rachaad White. I might be able to sell him for a first, but I also may be able to hack some production close to Rachaad White for half the season out of Gus Edwards, who I couldn't even get a second for. So little things like that. That is the edge when everybody knows what players are worth. Everybody has, certain biases for certain positions. So just think about that. Long spiel, but that's where my mind was going when you asked me about realistic expectations.
No good stuff there. Here, let's hit another trade. So this is 2 hammers. Thank you very much from someone, an anonymous donor of hammers here. Rich, we'll start with you on this one. It is also a 12-team Superflex, start 9, PPR. It's 4 point per passing touchdown. QBs, it looks like there are 0 listed. Yeah, 0 QBs. There are no QBs on this football team. Breece Hall, Gibbs, David Montgomery, and Singletary at running back. Amon-Ra, Garrett Wilson, A.J. Brown, Dio John, Jalen Hyatt, and then has Conklin and Musgrave at tight end. Still hasn't had the rookie draft yet, huh? Has the 101, 104, 105, 208, and all the futures. Someone says he's taking Caleb at 1. Marvin Jaden will follow. Have an inbox offer for A.J. Brown. It looks like it will be give A.J. Brown. You're getting Tyreek Hill and Cousins. Advice on what to do with the 104 and 105 without a trade. What do you think about that trade first, Rich? So it's a 12-team Superflex, start 9, 4 point per passing touchdown. Are you giving A.J. Brown for Tyreek Hill and Kirk Cousins? You have 0 quarterbacks.
I think not. I don't think so. I'm not. I think just the level of where Cousins has been like, I can always kind of arbitrage a Kirk Cousins-esque type player. And then what do we know about Kirk Cousins right now? Like, he's going to be potentially 37, coming off of a year where he probably recovered from Achilles, and we don't know if he's going to be the starter for the Atlanta Falcons next year or where. So, like, we don't really know that. You're giving up the kind of the A.J. Brown, age gap, which, I mean, Tyreek's a guy that maybe Tyreek plays till, or at the level he is to his early 30s because that speed don't crack until, he just has, and he's in the perfect marriage, right? Like Tyreek and Mike McDaniel, like perfect. Like you have like this marriage that's perfect. So I get the allure of wanting Tyreek. I just think of this roster not having QBs, and like Scott just laid out with Caleb, like, yeah, having Caleb 101, it feels good, like adding him to that type of roster, but the expectations, are they realistic for Caleb this year? Especially because Caleb, I think in general, let me ask you about Caleb anyways, you guys, from a dynasty stance. Does he ever run as much in the NFL to like kind of push that barrier? Or does he kind of cap out in like the Burrow, Herbert area as like a ceiling? I don't think he's going to run as much in the NFL as he did in college, right? Like, especially in designed run game. I think his best attribute is being like in the RPO game, like inside the 5-yard line. That's like, if he could score the rushing touchdowns, that is different, but I don't think he's going to like run. He doesn't have a high scramble rate anyways. He's one of these guys like Mahomes. He tends to buy time to throw, and, he's so good at making those off platform throws. That's why everyone comped him up. But I think there's actually a bridge where Caleb, for like a fantasy stance, like is never like really a top 6 guy. He maybe has a season or two where he does finish top 6, but I think he's more or less going to be like a back end QB1 type. That's how I project him as like an archetype anyways. That's good and valuable, especially if you get like 10 to 15 years of it. But I don't think you should think that he's like a savior either. Like, I think that this gamer may be thinking of because that roster is great. Like, like top heavy outside of it. You know, you've got Gibbs and Hall, and you've got, you know, Amon-Ra, Garrett Wilson, and Arthur Juan. Like, you're looking at that and you're like, yeah, I've got those blue chip dudes, right? But also, like, is that just adding Caleb to that? Does that mean you're a championship team? I think probably not, right?
Rich, do you golf?
I don't.
All right, so there's an old saying that says you drive for show and putt for dough. It's the same thing in the NFL. You run for show and you pass for dough. And I can't remember who said it, but a couple of years ago, it might have been on Daniel Jeremiah's show, but they just said, when you have one of the trucks at quarterback, if you have Joe Burrow or CJ Stroud or Justin Herbert, what is the highest EV play that you can run on any given play? It's probably those guys passing, right? Like that is the best play you can run. So the thought of, oh, that guy can run a 4.6 40, man. So like what you want is Caleb Williams to become a great passer, an efficient passer that you can run at an above average neutral pass rate and still maintain the efficiency. That is how Justin Herbert's had a top 5 season. That's how Joe Burrow's had a top 5 season. That's why people draft CJ Stroud at quarterback 5 or quarterback 6, even though I think expectations are too high for CJ Stroud. What if he's just QB 9 and that's where he stands? You know what I mean? Like, we've seen this story literally 3 of the last 5 years with Herbert, with Burrow, with Stroud, where they rise up to like, QB 3 in Dynasty. Then you're like, yeah, but I don't know if he has a top 3 ceiling. Meanwhile, you have guys like Anthony Richardson or Justin Fields, like, oh man, they're going to run, but they don't do much of the passing for dough, at least not yet. So I think
there's liquidity. There's liquidity because you mentioned Burrow and Herbert and all. I'm just saying, like, there's been a market for them forever.
I'm not scared of them either. Like there's only one Josh Allen, like every 20 years, you know what I mean? Like Mahomes has even been an outlier with, you know, you get 600 rushing yards out of Mahomes and you're like, oh man, that's the average, but it's not like, and I've seen it this year. I'm going off on a tangent a little bit, but the Greg Roman offense is typically run the quarterback. It is like, dude, look at the quarterbacks they've had. Like, do you think they're going to take the field and go, the plan here is for Justin Herbert to run? Probably not. He's probably going to run 3 or 4 times a game. 1 or 2 of those is probably going to be a scramble. They might run an extra designed run a game for him. But like to think, he's going to have 150 rushing attempts. And because he ran a 4.7 that he's going to run for 650 yards. Like that's not probably what they want to do. So I'm not scared of Caleb, but
no, I'm not either. I meant in context though of this roster of.
No, I was going to go the other way. You have Breece Hall, Gibbs, Montgomery, Amon-Ra, Wilson, AJ Brown. Like, I'm not wasting that on punting my QB2, drafting Drake May at 4 and hoping he starts. Like, what do I do with the 4 and 5, Rich? What quarterback can I trade him for? Can I move the 4 and 5 for?
I was tying that into the context of why I wouldn't be adding Tyreek, right?
For sure.
That's why I was tying it into of like saying
no reason to do that. No reason to do that. I'm trying to think of can I get a Kyler Murray for the 4 and 5? Can I get Lamar Jackson for the 4 or 5? I mean, I'm guessing this league probably values QB a little higher, especially one of the runners, just based on what he's saying. Like, it doesn't sound like there's any chance he can move up to 3. I would have no problem drafting Jaden Daniels on this team.
Yeah, 4 point per passing
like,
touchdown.
Rich, what would you need on top of the 4 on top of the 3 to give up the 4 and the 5 to get Jaden? Would you take a second for this roster?
So you're giving up the 104, 105, and you're getting
Neighbors
the
and
103
Adunze. Neighbors and Adunze / Bowers. I mean, hell, this team could use Brock Bowers too. We're starting Tyler Conklin. So I mean,
I would if you there's a scenario where you can pull off both. I mean, he's saying, I guess he's saying like, you know, it's like Marv and Jaden are like locked But so I don't know if like 103, what that quarterback's room looks like, right? Like, but I absolutely would if I could.
Would you give up 104 and a future first for Kyler, and then draft Bowers at 5, Caleb at 1, and that's my team, and that's a
I would prefer
probably
to do that.
Yes,
I would prefer to do that than give up 4 and 5 and 2. Then I would prefer to get the Kyler end of it too.
Love that.
And I mean, because again, I mean, we've seen a little bit of the passing season. It's the one thing that these guys, it's the second contract stuff, right? Like I love like from a ceiling stance, I love what Jaden Daniels can provide, right? Like it probably could be better in a short-term window than what Caleb Williams has from a fantasy output, but you do have kind of these pulling factors now. And I think it applies to Anthony Richardson too, that dynasty gamers maybe aren't applying either. And it's one of these things we don't know, but we saw it just play out with Justin Fields. But eventually, like what Scott laid out is the NFL is only going to give you so much rope if you can't throw. And it's been proven on every level to every player that has come through, like, even though we keep getting more athletes, like you have to be able to pass when the league expects you to pass. And we still don't have that answered yet with Jaden Daniels. And he has a lot of similarities to Justin Fields as a prospect and was an older prospect than Justin Fields. I mean, he's a guy that when he was pressured in college, 50% of the time scrambled or took a sack. That is not going to fly in the NFL.
No.
And Anthony Richardson only played in 2.5 games, essentially as a rookie, but he answered 0 questions from his passing profile. He was a disaster throwing the football in those 2.5 games. So, like, we still have, like, a lot to kind of prove with those types of players. And I am enamored with the short-term upside those guys have. I would say if you say, like, who has a higher fantasy ceiling in 2024, I would say Jaden Daniels does, right? And his apex outcome is going to score more fantasy points than Caleb Williams probably. I'd probably say, like, in a lot of iterations of outcomes of the seasons, right? But also, 6 years from now, is Jaden Daniels a starting quarterback in the NFL? I know Caleb Williams will be.
He will be. He's going to
Are you worried about that, Rich?
Leash.
I about that?
I'm not
drop sack to drop back ratio stuff that with Jaden. I mean, it's one of the worst we've seen.
Yeah, I mean, you have to with what just played out with Justin Fields. It has to at least be as part of the equation.
Yeah.
Now I'm so like if I need a quarterback and I'm picking I'm still taking him and I'm letting it, let Jesus take the wheel, right? Like, I'm letting it fly with Jaden Daniels. Maybe not Drake May.
A roster though that allowed like the 3rd most sacks last year. I don't know. I mean,
it has to be on people's minds though. It has to be. When we just seen play out with Justin Fields, where everyone got caught holding that bag. Literally everyone got caught holding that bag, and the writing was on the wall. Like it was literally there for us, and everyone said, "Oh man, did you see? He ran for 1,000 yards. Ran for 1,000 yards. I'm not giving him up."
Or a team's going to see it, man. They're going to trade him. They're going to trade for him, and he's going to be
was the argument for everyone at Fields.
There's too much talent there, somebody.
That was the argument for everyone at Fields. And when every GM was their feet to the fire for Justin Fields and trading for him, what did they say? I don't know if that dude could pass. I don't know if he could pass.
Dude, I remember reading, I think it was Mike Lombardi that talked about the Eagles could have got Justin Fields, which would have been a perfect fit, right? And even Howie Roseman didn't give up like a 6th to get him. Instead, he traded more for Kenny Pickett. So, I mean, it just that has to be very, very telling of. And I honestly, back to that team real quick, that when I have a kind of one of these half-ass contenders, you know what I don't hate? Getting a cheap Justin Fields. Like, you never know if I could get like 4 games out of him that elevates me in a place I never even belonged in the first place, but I don't have to pay the price for it.
Yeah, I took him at I'm trying to think what round it was, but I took him in Scott Fishbowl as like my QB3 or something like that, just to have him kick in there. We'll see what happens. Okay. Let's see. I'm surprised I was even invited back, honestly. I've probably finished in the bottom 1% in terms of performance. I'm glad it's a performance-based invite kind of thing. So
They should have invited you as a punishment to one of the MFL leagues, Clay.
Oh, goodness. I would have declined.
I was in the finals last year, but my room did the whole Superflex thing where they let me have Christian McCaffrey at pick 11 last year. So it wasn't even like anything I did. The room was just like drafted that doing everyone does in a Superflex league and takes like that bridge tier quarterbacks in the first round because they're like the format.
They're scared and they're going off the format, right? Okay, let's move to a question that we had from the crowd, a trade question here. This is from Dan Grimm. This is a 12-team Superflex start 10 PPR. It's 1.5 for the tight ends. Rich, we'll start with you on this one. It's Jalen Hurts, Burrow, Levis at quarterback, Javonte, Warren, Rob, and then has JJ, London, Devontae Smith, Mike Evans, D-Hop, and then Kincaid and Kittle at tight end. Has the 103. Trade the pick or pick neighbors is the question from Dan. Thanks for the question. What do you think, Rich?
I mean, I don't know what the trade scenario that you'd be looking at. I mean, you're not going to be able to trade this. I mean, this team right now is, you would say, like, you want to make a play for, the Brees Hall, Jalen Kidd, Jamar Gibbs, like Bijan, right? Like this is what what the only ingredient it's missing. You're set everywhere else. So I don't know what you can pull off 103 and something to get one of those guys, but I mean, other than that, then you could stay put. But that's what's missing. This is like one of those rosters where you would want to make a play for those guys aggressively. If I could do it, if I can dangle 103 and something, a future. To get one of those guys, because right now you're going to be right there, but not have that positional leverage unless Jalen Warren, something happens to Najee right now. But I still imagine that Najee's going to be a guy that they're still going to be giving the carries into the money touches, right?
The rock, yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's the Josh Jacobs. It's like the thing about Najee Harris is and what's funny is that he has Brian Robinson. It's the same type of thing. Like NFL coaches like these dudes. Like Absolutely. It doesn't matter. We could talk about all the inefficiency metrics and all the bullshit right under the table, but like these guys don't do anything wrong. Coaches like that, like about the running back position. They get like, that's like a guy like Najee is going to always be a roadblock for, at least for one more year, be a roadblock for Warren. The thing I do like about Warren versus some of those other guys in that kind of that archetype of his, like say like Jaleel McLaughlin, is Najee is, or Jalen Warren is, 210 to 215. Like he is at least in that range. People are doing this Jaleel McLaughlin thing. Like Jaleel McLaughlin needs like so many doors to open to be like a fantasy relevant player, because the dude is 190 pounds. Like, and he's not Devin Achane at 190 pounds. So like at least Jalen Warren is that going for the future, where you can kind of squint to see like, all right, if he still remains efficient, the Steelers give him a window or at least one season where he's the lead back. But this team right now is, I mean, look at this roster. I mean, you need that apex running back. So, I mean, I would try to aggressively play for that. I mean, would you even add a guy like Jonathan Taylor to this roster? Not even shoot that high. Would you make a play to get like a Jonathan Taylor or a Saquon?
How about trade one of your tight ends and tack on something for an apex running back?
How about I trade the Olave for Achane and a first?
That's that trade from earlier.
And a first.
That's that trade, yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying to load up on Najee Harris. So I got a couple fun facts about Najee Harris. Do you know what state he's from, Clay?
So is he not from the South?
He is not.
I don't know.
He is not. He took 2 official visits in college, and he is from California. The second team that finished second in his recruitment that he also took an official visit to actually was hosted by his son. Najee Harris will be a Charger next year. Just watch.
Oh,
yes,
you heard it here.
Give me some of that Najee when he's on the. Rich, how high would Najee be going right now if he was in Gus Edwards' spot?
Yeah, I mean, I had Ray on before the draft on that we did the running back class, and I told him my number one dynasty buy was Najee Harris for running back, because of where he is. He's like that guy that is just gonna like have a solid shelf life. He doesn't cost you an arm and a leg, and especially if you imagine a year from now, if like he did go to the Chargers, right? Like that was the outcome, what his dynasty stock would be.
And people go, oh, they didn't pick up his 5th-year option. I'm like, yeah, they're not stupid. There's no reason to pick up his 5th-year option. I mean, so I think he is just one of those guys that's probably got another 100,000 miles on him. I don't know how good that's going to be, but I think it's definitely one where you can count on some innings to be eaten over the next 4 years.
Yeah, it's a great thing. He's like I said, an innings eater, right? Like coaches love that shit, man.
He's David Montgomery, but with a bigger, I think David came into it with a little bit bigger name.
Same story. We're just like, oh yeah, the joke's on you if you have this guy, but like they just keep producing, just keep producing.
Yep, and have good character and all. They're just drama free. They'll tote the rock. It's funny, Rich. The first time you were on, you said Apex Hammer, and I was like, oh my god, how amazing is that? We're gonna steal that. You love saying Apex, and you love saying
I do love that Apex outcomes.
Easy button.
But that roster though, that roster has a lot of flexibility though, where you don't even necessarily have to shoot for a Bijan Brees, like maybe you add an Achane or like I said, a Saquon guy in that area. That's also a team where you can use a guy like Kittle, right? Like who, Kittle, especially right now in this window where it's at least non-zero, Brandon, that you get traded. I think it's closer to zero, but it's non-zero still right now. It's at least in the air. And, everyone's dropping the splits that Kittle has with one of those guys out of the lineup. You use that because Kittle's right on that. He's teetering on the, age 30 season. You use him to kind of move. There's a lot of flexibility I think that roster has because it's a really good roster outside the running back room. And that's okay.
That is okay. All right, let's move on to another one here. Scott, we'll start with you. This is a hammer from two hammers from someone. Thanks again. We've got a 10-team Superflex PPR, start 10, 4-point per passing touchdown. Goff, Carr, Minshew at quarterback. Brees Hall, Gibbs, Derrick Henry, Singletary at running back. JJ, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Ayuk, Evans, Ridley, Diojon, Palmer, Mooney. Then has Kittle and Musgrave at tight ends, 101, 102, but then no picks until 2026. The question is, take Marv and Neighbors at 1 and 2, then trade for a middle of the pack QB, or stick with Caleb and Marv. He says the league activity is medium, he or she. What do you think here, Scott? 10 teams start 10, Superflex, 4-point.
Well, I've been very steadfast this season of saying I do not want to draft the quarterbacks in a 10-teamer. But this team has a need at quarterback, so I think it's fair to say if you want to take one, you can pick. I actually don't think in a 10-team, 4-point per passing touchdown that Daniels or Caleb, if you went with one or the other, it wouldn't be crazy to go with Daniels over Caleb, especially the fact you already have a guy like Jared Goff that should give you top, let's be conservative, top 18 numbers. Maybe he cracks close to the top 12, but like you already kind of have your QB2, QB3 on a 10-team start 10. It's a pretty good team. Like it's one of those teams where I'm sitting here going, man, Brees Hall, Jahmyr Gibbs, Derrick Henry. I can't just slow play the rest of my roster when I have those three.
Right.
And then you have JJ and Amon-Ra, which they're probably two of the biggest 5-6 hammers in this type of format anyway. And then you have a good enough team around them with, 3 or 4 other guys that should score, that this team probably should try to be creative. I'm fine with Marv Daniels. I'm fine with Marv Caleb. Rich, I can't take 2 QBs in a 10-teamer. I don't care how shitty my QBs are. The scarcity is just not there, especially passing on Marv. Like that you're going right from a rookie pick to like an Amon-Ra level asset. Like I'm not passing on that just because I need a QB. So I'm definitely taking Marv. I guess shop the pick. Could you get another QB instead? Could you get Lamar Jackson? Could you get Kyler? If you felt more comfortable there, sure. But in the end, I think you just take a quarterback and you hope you can get by. And maybe you buy a 4th during the season. If Caleb's struggling, you go buy a, speculate. What can you get Deshaun Watson for? Can you get him for a 2nd in a 10-teamer? Like I would put another person in this room just in case, because I don't really want to rely on Carr and Minshew in a 10-teamer. I'm starting below replacement level with either one of those.
And a 4-point too. It's just
right.
They don't run. None of his quarterbacks do. Any thoughts?
This is the roster dynamic that you just laid out probably 15 minutes ago, Scott. This roster is never starting Deontay Johnson, Josh Palmer, Darnell Mooney, probably maybe even Calvin Ridley. It's not starting because you're adding Marv, right? So you're adding Marv. So you're starting Hall, Gibbs,
I'd be
Henry.
shipping Ayuk off. I'd sell Ayuk for first. Gives me more flexibility.
Man.
That's not a player I'm scared to sell at all.
Absolutely. You're adding Marv to this team, so you're not even. That's again where you say you've got these assets. You're like, these look solid, but like you're not using them. You're not going to be using them.
Even though it's a 10-team, are you giving up the 101 and 102 for Josh Allen?
Ooh. I don't think so.
You think there's another way to back into?
I think Marv in this type of league holds enough weight that I'm not just giving away that 102 on top. If I could do it in a different way, maybe could I give up Marvin and a future first, something like that? Like I would stomach it that way, but I don't think I need to do it here. I already have JJ and Amon-Ra. You know what I mean? Like I can slow play the quarterback position and not have to just give up a lot of my assets to go get one quarterback. Personally, that's how I would play it.
Fair. Sounds good.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, that's exactly the scenario Scott laid out, though. That's the roster that he's looking at. That it's like you're not going to start any of those guys in a 10.
Dude, a lot of 10-team leagues look like that. 10-team, 10, 11, 10 by 10. I mean, people just don't understand that when you are.
But that's how you get. He said he has no picks till 2026. That's how you turn Ayuk into a pick. I mean, you've got plenty of replacements for Ayuk.
Just reload.
Plenty of them.
Yep. That's something I struggle with too, though. You look at teams like that, and there's a lot of excess, and it's you can't help but like want a little bit of a buffer. Oh, if there's 2 injuries, I'm gonna be toast. Then what will I do? But look at Scott. He's like, I'm more disciplined than this.
No, I think it's
no. I get you. If I were like ultra active too, that would be.
Well, we forget this stuff. We forget all of this when we get into draft season. I'm guilty of it. I'm trying to be more disciplined every year. I say this. I'm trying to be more disciplined year after year after year. But if you're in like a 12 by 10, you do not need to use that pick on Jalen McMillan. Like the real out is that he just becomes far better than expected. And then if that happens, guess what you can do? You slide him in place of Jaden Reed and sell Jaden Reed. You know what I mean? But a lot of people will just draft without really the regard of what is the purpose of having this player on my roster. That too many of those picks is how you end up with a guy like Romeo Doubs on your team or Josh Palmer on your team. Like they're solid players, but they have no place in a 10 or 12 team start 10 lineup unless you make room to actually play them. Otherwise you're going to go, oh yeah, Romeo Doubs, cool. He was my third receiver off my bench. Yeah. He had 4 games where he scored 20 points, but guess how many of them were in your lineup? None. Never. And the week I needed him because I had 3 injuries and a bye, he shit the bed. And now I hate him because he's not good enough, but I can't get anything for him because nobody wants him. Like it's just that same old story over and over and over.
Yep. Okay, so this one is from Scott, a hammer from Scott. So it only makes sense to start with Rich on this one. This is
not me, Rich. I do not play in any start 8s.
So this is a shallow one for us here. 12-team Superflex PPR start 8 has Anthony Richardson, Herbert, Cousins at quarterback, Dick Chubb and trash cans at running back, Puka, London, Higgins, Pickens, Dell, Flowers, Hollywood, and then McBride and Pitts at tight ends. Has the 102, 111, and then has the 202, 410. 425 first, a couple seconds, a couple 26 first. Says DD and KTC see my team as the clear number 1 over everyone else. Can't get a running back to save my life. The market is asking for 3x overvalue for the position. Offered 4 firsts for Gibbs, Connor, a 25 first, and the 204, and it was turned down. Other owners also don't want to trade with me due to my team stocking up on picks. Thanks, Scott. League activity is low. What to do when I'm unable to trade for a need? Okay, so the league activity is low, and it costs 19 first to get an Apex hammer running back. So what are we doing here? Super shallow. I mean, they should be expensive, right? 12 by 8. What are you doing here, Rich?
Yeah, this is what happens when you have low league activity, right? Like this is like, what could you do? And especially when they isolate you and say like, not trading with you personally. You're just gonna have to basically like you're saying you're gonna have to use these picks, right, to land into some running back picks. You're not going to be able to use the 102 this year to do that. Unfortunately, you might maybe be able to use the 11 for like a Jonathan Brooks type and add to this roster. But I mean, you have just a litany of guys that are in that wide receiver purgatory tier that Scott has been talking
flower,
about.
Right.
I mean, literally that whole group, that whole list, and like we don't even know if London's going to be
in a start 8, dude. Everyone but Puka, you could argue, could be in that range of like,
right. I mean,
every single
guy, and that's probably why it's holding out so much value when you look at the KTC stuff, right? Like, in the because of those guys, but they're all in a very nebulous strike zone. So, I mean, maybe instead of trying to get Gibbs because you see what the asking price is, or just say that tier, that's asking price for that entire tier, that you use Zay Flowers or Tank Dell or something, and you say like, all right, I've got plenty of replacements for that type of guy, and maybe you can pull off a James Cook or an Isaiah Pacheco. You just aim lower, right? You just shoot lower. That's probably what you're going to have to do, at least attempt to do, right? Instead of trying to get Gibbs or Bijan or Breece Hall, you're going to have to move down to the Rashad Whites, the James Cooks, the Pachecos, that type of role. If you have to trade for a guy, that is, or you just hope Nick Chubb comes back and you turn those other future picks into something. But that's what I would do. I would be looking at like especially Tank Dell, Zay Flowers in particular. Obviously Hollywood, I think anyone would say just because you could chop them around, but like that's low hanging fruit. But Tank Dell, Flowers would be like the top 2 guys I'd be looking at to potentially move on right now, where their market has moved and where I have them.
Got it.
I wonder, Clay, if you can get, because here's my fear. Let's say you gave up, let's just say you gave up 4 firsts for Bijan, then he gets hurt. Like you have such a fragile build that I'm still gonna now it's a start 8,
and it still can't win with just adding Bijan. Go ahead.
So is there a way that I can kind of back my way into a lot of different options, right? Like Rich said, you're going to be able to draft a couple running backs. Like you have the 111, 202, 204. Take Marshawn Lloyd, take, Jonathan Brooks or Trey Benson, take Blake Corum, take Jalen Wright. Like at least those picks are so useless if you're trying to draft Keon Coleman, Ricky Pearsall. You know what I mean? Those are wasted.
Especially in this format.
This will be a league where you're responding to the league market by widening your shots on as many running backs as possible. So every one of those picks should be a running back, even the later seconds. 210. I'm in this format. I'm taking like a Will Shipley over Javon Baker or Malachi Corley. You know what I mean? Like just give me the running back, and I don't care if they fail. Give me all the running backs there, and can I use a future first and a second and just buy myself a Rashad White, a Najee, something like just enough to keep me competitive, and I'll take my chances that next year one of those 425 first ends up being a potential hammer running back. But I think when you're this far gone and it's literally you have to disrupt your entire roster build just to get one of the running backs that's already there, you're taking on all the fragility. And the funny thing is that fragility might come back to bite you in a 3-week stretch of the year, and you still don't win the championship.
Yeah.
You don't need a Bijan on that team to win. You just got to kind of cast a wider net and be creative.
Yeah. And that's when you can also go ahead, Rich.
I was going to say, I mean, that roster, like the hope for, if you're using those like 111 plus, like you're just going to end up with more Tank Dells. So,
yeah.
That's like what so you're just jamming it into the same problem that it's kind of been like the theme of like, we keep going along with this, with the real expectations and, understanding what you have with your roster of like, this guy's never going to play for me.
Yeah. And when you see stuff like that too, where it costs, 4 firsts to not get a running back, it's like, okay, well, who on my team is really expensive to this market? Can I get some stupid, amount for Anthony Richardson was on that team, or we had mentioned Puka, maybe go the other way and sell one of your studs, because that team wasn't there anyway. So
we've also got a petition for more starting spots in that league.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, more starting roster spots and just start a new one while you.
Except you know what I found, Rich? When you're the team that has all those good receivers and all those picks, the league's gonna go, I'm not expanding the starting spots because now your team's getting better. You don't have any hammers. You know what I mean? We want to keep it a start 8.
Yeah, no doubt. We are 58 minutes in. We have 640 eyeballs. It's technically 640 people, so that'd be 1,280 eyeballs, but that's what we say. Thank you very much for watching. Hit that like if you'd be so kind. The easiest way to help out the channel. Rich, we haven't even addressed you, and here we are an hour in. Would you like to talk about yourself in any form or fashion? Sharp football, go ahead.
Fine. Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, you said
I'm fine. I'm fine just doing this, man. This is cool with me.
Yeah,
I don't mind. Listen, everyone knows where to find the work and where it's at.
Rich is very smart. You should listen to all of his shows.
Yes,
they're informative. He's well spoken. He doesn't do a lot of ums and ahs, and it's I still do. Time. You do some, but you're informative. You're on my podcast rotation. I love listening to myself some Lord Reeves on 3.6x speed because that's what I listen to on now. And
come on, Scott.
Embrace the chaos.
There's no way you can make out a single freaking
100%, dude. I can't. 3x speed, and on Overcast, you put it on the eliminate all of the dead air, and it adds about a 0.6 to that. So legit, 3.6x speed. I can get about 50 hours of pods in a day.
I've always done. I always tried a podcast so people couldn't listen to me on 2x. I always wanted to make it so people had to slow me down to hear what I was saying.
Not me. I can do a Rich Hribar show in about 10 minutes. I can absorb all of the 10,000 words in 10 minutes.
Nice. Okay, let's move to another one here. Scott, we'll start with you from Joe Kremp. Thank you for the hammer. Appreciate it. This is we're going to say it's a 10-team Superflex PPR 1.75 tight end premium start 11. May, Russ, Bo Nix, Penix, Darnold at quarterback. Sexy. Mostert, Roshan, and trash cans at running back. Has Worthy, Pearsall, Sutton, Samuel, Shaheed, Cooks, QJ, and then has Fant at tight end. 225 firsts, 3 seconds, 426 firsts and seconds. Traded Herbert and a second for Drake May and 2 firsts. Also traded Dobbs, a second and a third for Pearsall. Starting a rebuild this year, thinking about making a push for a Pickens tier wide receiver. Thoughts? No. Scott shaking his head. So this is a 10-team Superflex start 11 tight end premium.
I mean, I love the Herbert for Drake May and 2 firsts. That's
strong. Yeah.
Imagine this team without getting that deal. Oh. I mean, gosh, Drake May is the best asset on this roster. So that deal bailed you out and got you at least kick-started with the rebuild. But there's not much else to sell. And you are, and I hate to say it, Joe, you are a couple years away from the outcome for Ricky Pearsall versus George Pickens versus Romeo Dobbs to really even matter.
Right.
Like, I truthfully, I wouldn't even have done the Dobbs a second and a third for Pearsall, but I do like at least the thinking of if there's a window on Pearsall where you can get something better, it's probably very hard to get something better for the combo of Dobbs a second and a third. So I don't hate that, but you don't have many of those type of deals you can make. Like you're not in a spot where you can be adding a second to, Rashid Shaheed to get Xavier Legette. Like you don't have a lot of extra pieces to where this team's so bad. I almost
it's everything must go.
Rich, would you sell everything on this team just for liquidity and just
100%.
Just bottom the team out entirely to where you have like 4 players?
Well, I'm assuming that they did that and they used some of the picks, obviously with May, Worthy, Pearsall was traded during the draft, but there's Penix and Nix. You can clearly see there's a bunch of rookies here, right? Like,
yes,
they used them, so they used those picks early. So they're already in the process of this was year probably 1 of adding to what was scorched earth, right?
Yes.
The problem is like the Worthy Pearsall group is probably never going to be enough. So you just have to hope that those guys enhance their market value and you can hopefully turn them into something, right? I think you probably can turn both those guys into something maybe now. Shaheed too, especially, right? Especially where does Shaheed go? I like Rashid Shaheed a lot in the context of where I could draft him in a redraft league, but in a dynasty stance, what is Rashid Shaheed ever really going to do for my roster, right? It's the same thing we've talked about all night. It's the same thing we've talked about all night. I
don't even think this team can be married to Nix and Penix and May. If one of those guys at all becomes shaky, there's a world where in 2 years when you're actually ready to start putting a 400 record roster out there, Bo Nix is on the chopping block. You know what I mean? You can't even really be married to the players you're drafting for the next 2 years either. because you just don't have enough assets. I don't know. This is definitely a. You might as well start scouting that 2027 class and trading for some of those picks. Seriously.
No, yeah.
If there's a time to trade for 2027 first, it's a team like this, to where you literally don't probably expect much to mature until then.
I love the 27 class. Holy shit. I have no idea. Okay, let's go to Oscar Lazardi, who came in here right after I set up the stream, 1:30 p.m. He got in here, so we're going to put his question up. This is a 12-team Superflex PPR, no tight end premium, start 10, and it's a 6-point. We'll start with you on this one, Rich. Purdy, May, Nix, AOC at quarterback. Then has Kyron, Jonathan Brooks, and Trash at running back. Addison, BTJ, Diggs. And then at tight end, Komet and Likely. 325 first, but not my own. Well, that's a bummer. Entering year 2 of rebuilding this former orphan. Moves?
I mean, I feel like this roster, though it has names, is in a similar spot as where we were with the previous roster. This is just not going to be a competitive team, right? Like it's going to be one of those false competitive teams. Like, you've got some good assets, but like there's no real contending upside for this roster, right? Like not especially right now, because you don't have
going to finish like 8th or 9th or
yes, this is like
that.
Yeah, I was going to say like this is like an 8th, 9th place team. Like it still has to be kind of a scorcher situation, I think, on this. And what assets do we have to even really rip here? Every dynasty player is on the Kyron archetype. Like you're never going to be able to sell that for market value. I mean, Jonathan Brooks can improve, but like Addison has already kind of nuked himself a little bit this period. Diggs is nuked. Like I don't really know like what you could flip these guys into in terms of like, future pick, equity. But this is another roster where I look at it and it's kind of like it's stuck in quicksand right now.
What are you doing?
This is the kind of team that you would have actually tried to buy a guy like Jordan Addison for Stephon Diggs. You know what I mean? But you already have Jordan Addison as your best receiver, which, like Rich said, a couple of these assets are already, they are what they are. I think you probably have to wait till it's in season to be able to move somebody like Diggs, Kyron. Like you're not going to get potentially what you could, but same time, you may never have a window with those guys, early season injury or something, and there's nothing. So I think you do have to be cognizant of those guys are literally on their honor in terms of how much they're going to give you. So I always say, if you have teams like that, you need to be more active with those teams and with your teams where you have just stacked rosters of constantly staying up on what can I move based on the time and what can I move based on I don't need this right now. Like that team, you can't afford to not be aggressive sending off an offer of Diggs if he has a good week 1. Like you have to be the aggressor. Don't just put him on the trade block. Go, okay, here's 5 receivers under the age of 27 that I would prefer to hit the reboot button and literally send out the deals. Like you got to be the aggressor if you want to move somebody like Diggs on that team.
I feel bad because that roster probably luck-poxed into Purdy and Kyron. Like, I feel bad. I feel bad for it because it was probably, unexpected.
Okay, so let's go. It is 9:54, and we all have hard stops at 10. So
but those guys are always the toughest from a dynasty stance because everyone's too sharp now, right? Like it's.
You mean the Purdy's, and the Kyrons?
Well, Kyron Williams is like a perfect example, right? Like, it's not 15 years ago you would have been able to do some shit because Arian Foster, but
yeah, oh man,
no longer.
The smoothest runner, man, Arian Foster.
No longer.
Let's see here. Okay, yeah, we got 5 more minutes, so let's go to this question right here. It's talking about age. What is it? Josh Widmer from earlier said, strategy question as a rebuilder. What age of players would you make a priority to move? So is 25 to 26 too old or perfect? So someone like Devontae Smith or DK Metcalf, the goal is being 1 to 3 years away from competing. What do you think here in terms of age, Rich? We'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, it always falls on to, I think, player expectation first, right? Like kind of Scott said, even before getting to the age, like, well, what does Devontae Smith ever become that guy, right? Does DK Metcalf, we've been waiting for, like, we keep telling ourselves every year, right? Like a DK Metcalf has, I mean, he's been inside the top 20 once so far in his career. And, so like, it's the same type of thing, like the realistic expectations of those guys carry weight. And because everyone loves wide receivers, they carry weight in terms of, startup draft capital. But like, those are guys you should probably be looking to sell anyways, on like most rosters, and tier up from those guys if you can do it. But yeah, that window is always, kind of really good. Like if you're saying you don't want to compete yourself into, 1 to 3 years, because you look at the wide receiver position in general, like age 26, like I have like a little chart that I use that I have kind of like projected like shelf life, and like at age 26 I basically have 4.9 usable years, right, for like the rest of your career. So like you're saying 3 years from now, like that's 1.9, it gets it gets way lower. So that's kind of the strike zone. Those are like assets anyways. If I have, those are guys I like to try to trade anyways, because of the same reasons that Scott kind of probably hammers home, like probably pretty weekly here, or has at least when I'm on the show and I've heard him talk about, because those are kind of the grouping of guys that they're attractive to have. Like, they're not the apex guys, man. Again, like I
you
want
get cheaper production, and yeah, they're not the apex guys as it is. Yeah. You got any thoughts here, Scott, age wise?
Well, you know who just turned 25 this year? T. Higgins. You know who turns 25 in 3 months? Tank Dell. So, I mean, age is there, and they're at totally different trajectories of their career, right? Tank Dell, we're seeing as an upward asset that is tied to Stroud for the next 3 years. In a year, he could be easily the number 2, maybe even the number 1 option. T. Higgins, there's a lot of questions. Like, A, is he even really that good? B, he's going to probably be changing situations, and he's going into his 6th freaking year. You know what I mean? Like, so it's not an age thing. I think if you're looking at receivers, especially, you need to look at the window of, I hate to say this, but when can I fool somebody else into thinking this is an asset that might have a little bit of hopium built into it? Like for Tank Dell, it's right now. If Tank Dell comes out and he shows he's healthy and he's basically doing something close to what he did last year, he's going to get a pass because Diggs is also there. So it's hard to expect him to be better than he was last year. But if he just shows it, he's a guy that between year 2 and year 3, I can see people going, hell yeah, that's wide receiver 12, wide receiver 15. Like he's moving upwards. T. Higgins goes out and is wide receiver 30 and misses 3 games due to injury. And then, everyone assumes he's going to sign somewhere good. But what if he signs on a team like, I don't know, the Giants, where you're like, oh, maybe they're not
Panthers.
He's going to go somewhere where he gets paid, right? But there's not a guarantee that that's anything better than what Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Malik Neighbors are dealing with. Like there's a chance he actually just goes to a situation because he wants money, and you go, okay, well, he's just wide receiver 25 wherever he goes now. So it's not about the age. It's about, you really have to assess like a 4 corners analysis of each prospect and each player. Where are they at in their trajectory? If I pulled the chat right now, what would they say about Tank Dell versus T. Higgins? That's when you decide who you want to buy and who you want to sell. Like the momentum of the player has nothing to do with their age anymore. We're past all of that age is shit like we had 3-4 years ago, where it was like, oh, you got to be a 21-year-old receiver. If you're 23 coming into the league, you'll never be good. Like we passed all of that. Age doesn't matter as much.
Good stuff. Let's go with
DK Metcalf is just going to continue to live at the same ADP for like another 5 years.
But he can bounce right back up to the top, and we know it. Get Sam Howell in there chucking that ball downfield. I don't know. I know.
I think, but you think about those guys, and I guess like DK would have been the guy that would have always fooled you because the dude has carved out of Mount Olympus. But like, you think about guys like DJ Moore when he was occupying like that top 6 like dynasty spot, right? But like never had that profile. Juju Smith-Schuster, right? Like after he had that year 2, and I think he was he might have been the wide receiver 1 in Dynasty for like a stretch.
He got up to 1. Yep.
I think he was wider because it was like kind of like a transitional period where like we aged out of like the top tier guys. And I think he did held like but that's like the guys, and like those are what those guys are, right? Like the Devontae Smiths. It's like we have better hammers now at the top, like so to speak, that when we had a dry period where DJ Moore and those guys can get away with it.
Well, Clay falls for this too. Clay loves himself a DK or a Pickens or a Higgins, the big outside receiver that can go up and catch. But think about that. Think about T. Higgins, how he has lasted, basically living off the laurels of his first 2 years, right? And now he could bounce back. But isn't there a certain allure with guys like Pickens and Higgins where they do just enough where you'll keep buying in? Whereas if Zay Flowers goes out this year and is nothing more than what he was last year, people are going to go, oh, he's small. He's a slot only. They're going to get somebody better than him next year. I'm done with him. But DK, Higgins, I mean, those guys will continue to, people will just buy in until they go, okay, yeah, he's Mike Williams now. You know, that's where they have to get.
Yeah, the game has changed. Like I said, that archetype of receiver, like that prototypical X only guy, is like not the guy scoring the most fantasy points anymore, where it was, you know, when we played fantasy football. And granted, there still is a guy like AJ Brown, but you know, AJ Brown is a guy that still is getting 25-30% of his snaps in the slot, you know, and shit, it might even go up with Kellen Moore. Like there's still a chance like he's the benefactor and not Devontae Smith of that transition. So we'll see what happens. But he's been like the one guy from like that archetype that's like survived like this period. But all the other guys have not. Like they really have not survived this transitional period of the NFL. I'm curious about Marv, man. I'm curious like how the Cardinals use Marv and how he's utilized. You know, is he utilized the same way in college? Does he get more diversity than he was used in college? So it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun to look back on, like, because Neighbors is the opposite, right? Like Neighbors had all of that diverse usage already pre-packaged, but landed in a shittier spot. Like so, but he has all the usage like we're looking for. How the modern fantasy football wide receiver one's being used. Neighbors actually fits that bill more than Marv does, which is kind of interesting. It's interesting dynamic.
Yeah, no doubt.
I got to take advantage of Rich's time. Rich,
yeah, I know. I was about to say, we got to wrap, but it's
no, tough, Rich, pick a receiver 2. You got to plant your flag right now. Who is the receiver 2 on the Cardinals?
The receiver 2, Michael Wilson.
Okay, fair. So no Greg Dortch, no Zay Jones, just just go with Michael Wilson.
Yeah, I think it's Michael Wilson. Because Michael Wilson, but that's why Michael Wilson also ties into what I said. It gives me more hope that Michael Wilson just plays that X and they do some stuff with Marv. That's my hope, right? Like they use Michael Wilson. You say we have that body that can fill that role. He can we have a pure slot guy like Greg Dortch, but we can now use Marv as a chess piece. He doesn't have to play one position because we have 2 guys that can play those positions. Then you have just Zay Jones as like your veteran dude that can do a certain number of things.
He plays like the Pickens or the Higgins role or the Nico Collins role, where you just hope Marv is used in a way that allows him to do everything. You know what I mean? Like they can.
Yeah, we've just been down this road before. Like my vision might not be Drew Petzing's vision. But I'm hoping that they use Michael Wilson as a just traditional X receiver, Greg Dortch as your slot, and then Marv can be a chess piece that they move in different. Like he does play the X, he does play the slot, can do those things. That's what I'm hoping. But like Neighbors, we already got a good like grasp of like what they're gonna do with him. Like that's what's great, man. It's what makes Dynasty football great. That's going to be fun to look back on this particular draft class as well. Because like Adunze, like we know rookie year Adunze, like probably is going to be just a lid lifter, right? Like probably a good bet with Keenan Allen being there. Like he's probably just going to be a lid lifter, which I think is great because people always do the JSN thing with Adunze. But if you give Adunze 90 targets, he's going to do more with them than what JSN did, just because they're going to play a different position. Like those 90 targets Adunze are just going to be more fantasy valuable than what was given to JSN in his role where 35% of his targets were at or behind the line of scrimmage, right? Like that's not going to happen to Adunze, even though people are drawing the corollary of like, look, he's behind these 2 other veteran wide receivers, but the types of targets he's going to be getting as a rookie are be totally different than JSN's were.
I'll be very interested to see if Keenan Allen misses any time, how the usage looks like, because that's going to be a preview of kind of what they want to do in the future, probably.
Yes.
But you never know. I saw somebody today say there's a chance that Keenan Allen gets extended. And now you're going like, I don't, but they can afford it. They can afford it. I'm surprised DJ Moore hasn't been a guy that said, hey, rip up that $20 million a year contract I signed. I'm 2 years into it. You know what I mean? Yeah. Said sometimes you get lucky.
Market now. All right, y'all.
I love it.
Reeves, thanks again for joining. Always a pleasure, man. I know the crowd and those listening on replay loved it and will love it. You can listen to it again, even if you were here live. Thanks again. Hit that like if you'd be so kind. Subscribe if you play Dynasty Football and you're not subscribed to this Dynasty Trades in 5 channel. Reeves, where can they find you real quick? Go ahead and say it.
All right, listen, sharpfootballanalysis.com, cranking out stuff for the draft guide. I always love coming on here and talk with you guys because you guys like show like this and stuff. You know, it makes me think. Like I don't have all the answers, and I love having a conversation with you guys just about playing the game, right? And I think that stuff's that's a lot more valuable than just us, you know, picking a player and saying, "Give me Reeves, give me a sleeper, or give me a bust this year." Like that stuff doesn't matter.
Good stuff. Good to hear it. All right, y'all. I'm going to end this stream. Appreciate it.